They killed her, cooked her, and ate her with potatoes. Just imagine going to someone's apartment and later finding out that what you ate was actually a human being. This is the disturbing case of a 16-year-old Russian girl by the name Karina, and supposedly this has to be one of the most disturbing cases that have ever been recorded. Despite her mother not liking her new friends, Karina decided to go visit her two friends, one of them being a butcher, in their apartment where they drowned her and did some horrific things to her body. In that apartment, they decided to immediately start preparing her body like food. They cooked her, seasoned her, and served her with potatoes like if she was nothing, like if she was just a piece of food. What makes this more disturbing is that one of the friends came to visit them in their apartment where he unknowingly ate Karina. Just imagine going over to your friend's house and unknowingly eating a human. I wouldn't know how I would react. Once the two friends were caught, all they said was that they were just drunk and hungry, and honestly, it didn't seem like they cared about Karina at all. I do feel bad, really bad for what happened to her, but I feel like the mother had sensed that something was wrong because she didn't like her being around them, and it's very upsetting, you know. Always listen to your parents, guys. And honestly, don't trust people too much, and the next time you go eat at someone's house, be careful and pay attention to whatever they're serving you. She dismembered her brother and ate his genitals. This has to be one of the worst cases in Brazil, and it happened in 2019 where an 18-year-old girl by the name Karina dismembered and murdered her brother. According to reports, a mother had left their 18-year-old teenage daughter to watch over her 8-year-old son while she ran errands, and it was supposed to be something quick. However, upon arrival, she noticed something off. Her daughter, refused to open the door. She would not let her in at all, so she had to supposedly call someone to kick the door down. Inside the home, police found a very horrific scene. The boy was surrounded by candles and ritualistic things, and he was completely dismembered. His eyes were literally pierced out, and his feet were burned. They also noticed that the sister apparently tried to remove his head, so it was somewhat decapitated but not fully, which is absolutely awful. His genitals were also missing, and they say that she supposedly admitted that she ate them. Investigators say that this has to be one of the most disturbing cases that they've ever investigated, that honestly left everyone involved completely traumatized.
Now, this is very graphic. The worst murder that I seen in prison. Yes, it happened to a child molester. And yes, I felt any type of emotion. You know, you hurt a child in any way like that, I have no pity for you. But you can't unsee what I saw. So the way it's structured in Florida is, even if you have these crimes or you're high profile and you can't even house with somebody, they'll still put you in the high custody unit. So you're in there with disciplinary confinement, C1, C2, closed management cases where people can't have any property. They can't be housed with anybody because they're too violent, shit like that. Well, this piece of shit molested a child in Jacksonville. And one of these dudes was a cutthroat, which is one of the most notorious, ruthless organizations in the state of Florida. And he knew the family that this guy did it to. So he paid the right people, talked to the right people to make an accident happen. Now, when you're doing time, like in a 2-man cell, and they open your cell, you can go to the day room, right? But if you're on CM1 or CM2, or you're housed alone, or you're in DC confinement, you're locked down 24/7. So the molester was allowed to go to the day room, but only by himself for 20 minutes to make a call, watch some TV, and then go back to his cell. He wasn't supposed to be housed with anybody. But like I said, accidents happen in prison all the time. So this chomo piece of shit is walking down there feeling safe. They're just the most evil, sick motherfuckers in the world. They play that weak, meek person when they're around a bunch of alpha males, a bunch of killers, a bunch of real ones, and then they're fucking the killer, most destructive, evil, demonic motherfuckers around beautiful, weak children and women. That's when they take advantage of them. So the cutthroat accidentally got his door popped open for the day room at the same time he did. Now, what I'm about to tell you is very graphic. So dude had a lock in the sock, right? And he had it tied really tight and taped up around it. I mean, he really put a lot of effort into making this into a very dangerous weapon. And he comes down there, and the guy's screaming, "I'm not supposed to have anybody in the day room. Sarge, help me, help me." And immediately the cutthroat just starts hitting him in the head over and over and over. I mean, he is just, there's blood everywhere. He is just beating his face in with this lock. Well, the lock ends up getting tied like around the guy's arm or something like that because it had a sock, right? He pulls him close to him and just starts smashing his face in. Now, somehow, the cell on the bottom, which was a friend of the dude, was also popped open, but dude never went outside. So he drags this chomo into the cell. I'm watching through my cell. All that shit go down. He takes this child molester's head, puts it in the toilet, and drowns him. Just starts kicking him and holding his fucking foot on the back of this chomo's head. Within 5 minutes, the Doom Squad comes. Everybody's put in cuffs. And there's no cameras back there. So the officers wrote it up as they accidentally made a mistake opening the door. But they said the guy, the chomo, was on K2, smoked some twack, was paranoid, and attacked the cutthroat first, and he fought out of self-defense. Nobody got in trouble. Nobody got extra time. Maybe a guy got slammed or something like that. But that was one of the most just horrendous things I've ever seen in my entire life. I can never forget that. And yes, it happened to a chomo. And yes, I feel no pity for him at all, but still, it's one of those things that you can never unsee. Stay out, stay free. Us.
He admitted to torturing his girlfriend's 3-year-old daughter and even flat out told her that he was going to take her life all over potty training, and she still left her daughter alone with him. And now we finally have an update on Clover's condition. His name is Tyrell Balone, and he was a registered nurse, a charge nurse to be specific. And the mother, Amber Leary, was a corrections officer but became a CNA. They met in New Hampshire while working and later relocated to Utah. While she was in New Hampshire, Clover was doing okay on her potty training, but after the move, everything changed according to them. They claimed she was taking her diaper off by herself and having accidents around the house and that she was aggressive. In the weeks leading up to June 27th, 2025, Tyrell had harmed Clover by his own admission several times, including one time Clover was hurt so badly she couldn't even open her eyes. And all the while, he was texting Amber saying flat out, "I am going to kill her." I want to go ahead and give a warning before I finish this case because it is truly horrific. Clover survived the brutality that was done to her, and she had to fight so hard to be here, and now she deserves to be home with her family. They are actively fighting right now to bring her home, and if you can help them, it will be on my page. Tyrell would wake up between 4 and 5 a.m. and get everything ready for Amber to go to work. She worked from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. At 1 p.m. on this day, he texted Amber and said that Clover had an accident, and while cleaning it up, Clover bit him, so he spanked her and put her in her room to watch a movie. Amber gets home around 6:30 p.m. She feeds Clover, and then they go watch a movie together, and she goes to bed shortly after because she works early in the mornings. But around midnight, Tyrell claims Clover had another accident, and so he wakes Amber up to help him, and they put Clover into the bed with Amber. Tyrell claims he then went and slept on the couch, but at 4 a.m., Clover had another accident. An hour and a half later, at 5:30 a.m., is when Tyrell is accused of throwing Clover into the wall. He claims that he didn't mean to, that she ricocheted off the bed. But after that, she was no longer responsive. He said she had a steady heart rate, that she was breathing, but she wasn't responsive. Were the police called at this point? No, they were not. Amber leaves for work, but shortly after, Tyrell is like, "Hey, you need to come back home right now." And makes another phone call, but again, not to 911. He calls his mother, who is a nurse practitioner. Allegedly, he is freaking out, saying he doesn't want to go to jail, and Amber is saying that Clover is dead with a heartbeat. Tyrell's mother asked him to show Clover on FaceTime, but he said no and walked away. So Amber turned on the FaceTime and let her see Clover, and immediately his mother's like, "You need to call 911 right now, or you both are going to jail." The fact that the biggest concern here was avoiding the consequences for your own actions and not saving a child's life is unbelievable. Amber claims Tyrell would not let her call 911 and that he told her, "You have no friends, no money, you need me," basically. And when Amber asked him what happens if she dies, Tyrell allegedly responded and said she'll be fine. 3 hours have now passed since Clover was injured when Amber tells Tyrell, "I really need a smoke, I'm gonna go outside." And when she went outside, she finally called 911. Based on some of the things I've read, I believe Tyrell at the time thought his mom was the one who called and not Amber. Now, initially, Amber wasn't going to be charged until the interviews and her text messages were accessed by police. Amber told police at first Tyrell was really good with Clover until the potty training issues and Clover's aggression, and so Tyrell became increasingly frustrated. She knew the level of frustration he was at, and she still allowed him to have access to Clover. When police went through their phones, they found text messages that occurred a week before all of this. Amber had left for work and was not even gone for 2 hours when Tyrell started texting her, freaking out. He texted her and said that he was going to murder Clover. A few hours later, he texted again and said he was going to crack her skull. And then he said, "I'm finished with her. We can't have a life together with her being like this. And now hearing her voice makes me want to kill her." And instead of calling 911, CPS, a family member, a friend, at minimum just leaving him, she stayed in the home with Clover for a week because she knew that no one could see her that way. This 3-year-old little girl couldn't even open her eyes, and her mom did nothing. And it's the same thing the day this all happened. For 3 hours, your daughter was unresponsive and you waited to call police. It is an absolute miracle that she survived. Tyrell was asked, why did Clover have raccoon eyes? And he admitted it. He admitted that he harmed her. He admitted to spanking her not just with his hands. He used an ice pack at one point. He admitted to backhanding her, to slapping her regularly, to hitting her with a closed fist. And Amber knew and didn't get Clover out of this home immediately. And now her life is forever changed because of it. This all happened in June of 2025, and it is past time for Clover to be with people who love her and will keep her safe. Her family has been fighting for her from day one. They love her so much, and they want to bring her home, but they need help. She has made it so far, and it is time for her to find a stable new normal.
This is the scariest story I've ever heard in my life, and I know that because I watched this TikTok video like years ago, and I still remember this story and think about it at least weekly. So let's get into it. There was a trend going around years ago where people were telling their scariest stories that they cannot explain. And I'll be honest, a lot of these stories were paranormal, and it just shocks me because I cannot remember if this woman's video went viral or not, but it was hands down the scariest story that I have heard a part of that whole trend. And if you know what I'm talking about as I'm explaining this video, please tag the person because I've been scouring the internet for this particular video. So the story starts off with this woman talking about her college home that she split with multiple roommates. And I don't remember the exact break that they were on in college, but it was her alone in this house for a long period of time. And she particularly was staying because she had to work her job that was in town. Comes home one night, and because she had been alone in the house, she had shut all of the extra doors to other rooms that she knew she wouldn't go into. Not super unusual. I did the same thing when I was sharing a house in college. And it's important to note that the attic was split into 2 rooms, one of them being her room. I remember her saying that there was a latch on the door in her bedroom, and she decided to lock it that night, or she locked it every night. I cannot remember. But when she woke up the next morning, the room directly across the hall in the attic to her was open. And at first she was like, oh, I must have forgotten to close the door that night. So she enters the room for whatever reason and sees that the closet door had also been open. And upon opening the closet, she sees remnants of somebody who had been sitting in the closet for a long period of time. She had no idea who it was. She still has no idea who it was. And every time she thinks about the story, it gives her chills. And I particularly remember her using verbiage in the video that made me feel sick. And it was something along the lines of whoever was in that closet was in fact so familiar with the house that they were able to go and sit in a very particular room and be able to watch her, which just adds an additional layer of this story being genuinely terrifying. But yeah, if you know what I'm talking about, maybe you don't, maybe it's too niche and it was so long ago that people don't remember this video, but there is a reason why I remember it, and now you can too.
Is Missing is one of those stories that keeps me up at night, and you guys have been begging me to cover it, so today I'm finally doing that. But before we get into anything, I need to clear something up first. Megan is Missing is not a real case. It's a movie. It's fiction. A film that some guy made on a very low budget in the late 2000s and released in 2011, and which then basically just sat there collecting dust for almost a decade until TikTok got a hold of it in 2020 and absolutely lost its mind. But let me explain why so many people think it's real, because that part of the story is actually fascinating. The movie follows a 14-year-old girl named Megan who starts texting back and forth with a boy that she meets online who goes by Josh. He tells her he's 17 and Megan believes him despite never actually seeing his face because his webcam is always conveniently broken. And over time, Megan, who had been abused by her stepfather since she was just 9 years old and who was always surrounded by boys at school who mostly just looked at her body like she was something to use, starts falling for him because she was lonely and desperate for somebody to just actually see her. And Josh, it felt like he did. He listened. He remembered things that she told him. He made her feel like the most important person in the room. And for a while, it was actually perfect for her. Until one night, Josh convinces her to come meet him in person behind a local diner. And Megan, who had been waiting weeks to finally put a face to this boy she's been talking to every single day, she breaks the rules, sneaks out of the house, and goes to meet him. But then she never comes home because that sweet, patient, understanding boy she thought she knew, that was never real. Josh is not 17. He is a grown man who's been using her loneliness as bait from the very beginning. And the moment she showed up behind that diner, the act was over. He kidnaps her and takes her to his basement where he had already built a torture chamber just for her. Weeks passed and Megan's best friend Amy, 13 years old, just a kid, starts investigating on her own to try to find her. She starts messaging Josh directly, and pretty quickly she suspects that he's behind it. And Josh, realizing that Amy could blow this entire thing wide open, starts stalking her, learning her routines, following her to the places that she goes alone, the places she feels safe, until one day she's finally alone and he kidnaps her too and brings her to that same basement right alongside Megan. And what happens to the both of them in that basement, what those last 22 minutes actually show you, is what nobody who has seen this movie can get out of their head. I'll just say this much. There is a scene where Josh places Amy's childhood teddy bear in front of her while he humiliates her. And at the very end, he tells her he'll let her go if she gets into the barrel. And she does. But when she opens the barrel, Megan is inside. But here's the thing. None of it is real. And the reason so many people couldn't tell is because the director of this movie did everything in his power to make sure that you believed it was. The director, Michael Goy, before he even wrote a single line of this script, he went and buried himself in actual FBI files, real documented cases of children who went missing after being contacted by strangers online, real predator profiles, real case notes from investigators who had seen what happens to these kids. And he took all of that research, case after case after case after case, and he composited it into one single fictional story. So when the movie opens up with the words based on real events, he's not lying to you. He's technically telling you the truth, but it's not retelling one specific case the way that, say, Girl in the Bunker retells a story of Elizabeth Shoah, a real girl who was actually kidnapped and locked underground by a man that she had met online. That's a real case, a real girl, and a real crime. Megan is Missing is different. There is no Megan Stewart, there is no Amy, and there is no Josh. But the events, the method, the grooming, the way that it escalates, the way it ends, all of that are real things that do happen in the world to real victims. Michael Goy didn't want you to just know the story. He wanted you to feel it. So he made a choice that would change everything about how the film landed. He shot the entire thing like it was footage recovered from a real crime scene. Grainy webcam footage, shaky phone camera clips, fake news broadcasts. Nothing about it looked like a movie. It looked like real footage somebody had actually pulled off of a dead girl's laptop. And that was completely 100% intentional. He wanted you to feel like you were watching something real because he wanted the message to be loud and clear. Don't trust strangers. And it worked, but maybe a little too well. Because when the movie went viral on TikTok in 2020, millions of people, and I mean millions, genuinely believed they were watching real footage of a real missing girl. People were posting warnings, people were crying on camera, people were tagging police departments in the comments demanding answers to a case that didn't exist. The panic was completely real, even though the case wasn't. So I'm sorry to break it to you guys, but Megan is not missing. But although the movie is not real, it's still something that happens to teenagers every single day. There is no Megan Stewart, but there are so many girls with her story in those FBI files. Girls who met somebody online who knew exactly the right things to say. Someone who built enough trust over enough weeks that by the end of it, these girls would have done anything for them. And when they did, that's when they were gone. The goal of this movie was to attack a huge and growing crisis of teenagers trusting strangers on the internet and then going missing. The film was designed to scare parents and make teenagers think twice before they typed back to somebody they'd never met in person. And it worked. But like I said, maybe a little too well. But then again, what if that was the goal all along? Please stay safe out there, you guys. Stranger danger. I'll see you in my next video. Group hug.
Stop scrolling. Please listen. This needs to be heard. Many of you, I'm sure, have read the Epstein files and seen how they talk about how newborn babies, young babies, children taste like cream cheese because they've been eating their mother's milk. I'm getting choked up talking about this. Have you seen the new Cheez-It commercial? If you haven't, go watch it. Because I'm genuinely fuming. This is making me so angry. In this new commercial, it's a female nurse looking at a scan of a baby in a womb saying, that baby looks cheesy. Are you kidding me? Are you joking? It's right in front of our face, and they are making us laugh. They're like throwing it in our face because they think it's funny. It's not funny. We are genuinely, we are not mad enough about this. Cheez-Its are fed to children. Kids love eating Cheez-Its. It's one of their favorite snacks, one of the most known snacks for kids. And the commercial is a woman looking at a baby scan and saying, that looks cheesy. Read the Epstein files, please. It's disturbing, yes, but it's happening. It's not the kind of thing that you can just filter out because it's genuinely happening and it's a problem. Yes, it's disturbing. Yes, you will get upset about it. Get upset. It's happening. You can't just hide from it. Please just go watch the commercial. Cheez-Its, what the crap?
Living with the Devil, the Judith Barzey story. Trigger warning. Judith was born June 6, 1978 to her parents, Joseph and Marie, who were immigrants that were chasing the American dream. They both came to America with the hopes of becoming rich and or famous, but that didn't happen for either one of them, so Joseph became a part-time plumber. While out in public, Joseph was a sweet, charming father who paraded his daughter around like a new toy, but behind closed doors, he was a monster. Joseph was a tyrant, the dictator of this family. He didn't see them as his wife and child. He saw them as his possessions. He owned them. The neighbors would hear Joseph screaming at Maria and the baby at all times of the night. You're stupid, you're ugly, the baby's a brat. And it didn't help that Judith was a lot smaller than the average child. At 5 years old, she looked like a toddler, except she acted more maturely because she was older. Because of her small size and her puppy dog eyes, everywhere they went, Judith got a lot of attention. People loved her, but Joseph hated that. He would get so angry that she would get attention and he wouldn't, and when they got home, he took it out on her. By the time she was 5 years old, Judith had had no acting classes, no training, nothing, but that didn't stop her from being discovered. Family was at an ice skating ring one night when a producer/director walked up and said, "Wow, have you thought thought about putting your child into acting, she would be perfect. Maria said she's never had any training. The director said it don't matter. She's got the look. You need to get her to an audition. So Maria took Judith to an audition for Donald Duck Orange Juice, and Judith nailed it. Casting thought, wow, she looks so sad and lost. It makes me feel bad for her. I want to hug her. She makes me want to buy the product. We need to hire her. She looked that way because she was sad and lost. She was being abused at home by her own father, but they didn't care about that. That first paycheck brought a big shift in the home, and Joseph now looked at his daughter like she was trying to outdo him. She was humiliating him because she was making money. Instead of being happy that they now have made an income, he's angry with Judith. I'm the man of the house. I'm supposed to make the money. I'm supposed to control the finances. How dare you bring in that much money? But he damn sure didn't mind spending that money. After that first job, Maria got serious. She became Judith's manager, her agent, her chauffeur, basically her handler. Before every audition, Judith would be standing there in her pretty dress with her hair and makeup on, and that's when her father would strike. You think you're so special and cute? You're not. You're ugly and stupid. He tried to ruin any chance she had at getting the role while also demanding she better get the role because they needed the money. Her mom would grab her by the hand, walk her to the car, and tell her to stop crying, dry your face. It's okay. We're going to work now. Maria would drag Judith to hundreds of auditions, sitting in these hot, stuffy waiting rooms all day, hoping that Judith would get the part. Judith was happy to work because that meant she was out of the house away from her abusive father. Now, at some point, the doctors were very concerned about Judith's small size, so they prescribed her growth hormones, but her mom didn't give them to her. Maria was accused of withholding the growth hormones so Judith would remain small and could work as a child actor longer. Friends claimed that Maria told them for Judith to get certain roles and remain in this industry, she had to look small and young, but keeping Judith at this small size would make her an even bigger target for her father, who at this point was physically abusing her on a regular basis. He was her biggest bully. By 1984, Judith faced a dark omen, damn near a premonition. She played the role of a daughter who was murdered by her own father, and this role took a toll on Judith mentally. To others, it was just a script, a role, or a show, but to Judith, it was a foresight of what was to come. It was her reality. Not long after they filmed that episode, Judith's anxiety got a lot worse, and she began plucking her hair out. It's a disorder, but I can't remember the name. Let me know in the comments. She would pluck the hair off her head, leaving big bald spots. Instead of getting her help, her mom would cover it up by telling the makeup artist just flip her hair over, make it look fuller, and send her on the set, and that's what they did. By 1985, her career accelerated. She was everywhere. If you watched TV, you saw her face. Despite the abuse at home, Judith landed hundreds of more roles. She played on Cheers, Punky Brewster, The Twilight Zone, and Jaws, and many more commercials and shows. She was working her way to the top. This money brought a whole new lifestyle. They got a new home, new cars, new clothes, but with each accomplishment came more abuse because Joseph was so jealous and wanted her to suffer. Between the beatings, he would tell Judith every day, you're trash, you're ugly, you're stupid. He would poke her in the face and say, you would have nothing without me. I created all this. I own it. I own you, and I can take it away. It was damn if you do, damn if you don't with him. If she got the role, she was a lazy brat that didn't deserve it. If she didn't get the role, she was a lazy brat that didn't try hard enough. You couldn't win with him. Now living in a new neighborhood, the neighbors could still hear Joseph abusing his family, yet no one called the police. There were times where Maria called the police, but when they came to the home, Maria would send them away and say, he's calmed down now, everything's okay. The neighbor said, one day Judith was outside sitting on the grass playing by herself when all of a sudden her father came out, grabbed her by her hair, snatched her up, and drug her back into the house. I could hear her screaming for hours after that, but I didn't call the police. I didn't get involved. At this point, Maria did not need Joseph for anything. She was financially stable off Judith's income. They could get a house anywhere they wanted. They had vehicles. She had a way out, but Maria chose to stay. Why, you may ask? Because Maria thought a divorce would be too embarrassing, and she didn't want to give up this big, beautiful house that Judith's money paid for. Maria's friends are telling her, he's going to kill this child. Do you understand, Maria? You got to get out of there. She would often tell her friends and family, I'm not giving up the house. He won't sign off on the deed, and I'm not going to let him have it. We worked too hard for this. But she stayed anyways because she didn't want him to get the house or any of the money. All material things that just aren't worth dying over. So as usual, Maria would take Judith. They would go do her role where she would sit under these hot studio lights for hours, burning up, sweating, bored, repeating the same lines over and over, but it was so much better than being at home. On camera, she was the happy, smiling little girl that made all the punchlines funny. But once she got in that car, she tried to make herself invisible to avoid her father's abuse. From the time they walked back in that door, her father would start. Every time she came back home from a role or audition, there would be hell to pay, and he made sure of it. One makeup artist wrote, I could see the blood marks on her neck, and I started to ask what was wrong, but I didn't want to get involved. It was none of my business. You have to understand, this was a different time. Instead of calling the police or asking if she was okay, I simply put makeup over the bruises and sent her on set. By 1988, this 9-year-old little girl was pulling in over $150,000 a year, which was real good money for back then, and was now working with big celebrities and big companies. She was no longer a little girl. She was now a brand. She had one hell of a resume. She was definitely going places as an actor. At this point, Joseph had stopped working. He wasn't bringing in any income. Her father's alcoholism and abuse had gotten significantly worse. worse. He was now obsessed with the fact that Maria and Judith were going to leave him. So now anytime Maria and Judith were leaving out to go to a roll, Joseph would stop them at the door and say, if you're 5 minutes late, I will hunt you down in your throat. You better be here on time, not a minute late. He would lean in and grab Judith's face and squeeze it hard and say, you will never leave, you'll die here. Joseph would spend his days drinking and stewing over the fact that his daughter made more money than him, that she was becoming successful and he wasn't. But again, he didn't mind blowing her money on fancy cars and houses and clothes and cigars and alcohol. He was so insecure over being solely dependent upon a child that he was forcing to work. And his behavior was getting a lot worse by the day. He was now pulling out a knife, put the blade up to her jugular and say, that's all it takes is one push, Judith, and it's over. You're dead. You're never leaving me. Mind you, Maria is watching this. She's standing at the door with Judith. She sees what he's doing. Part 2 coming up. Prepare yourself and stay tuned.
There's something so incredibly disturbing about the death of Ray Rivera. It's not the fact that he was found dead in a conference room of a highly secure historical hotel 8 days after going missing. It's the fact that the only reason he was found was because his coworkers somehow spotted a hole in the roof of said hotel. And it's the fact that literally no one knows exactly how he ended up where he did, because the distance from where he supposedly jumped off to where the hole was in the roof does not add up. Oh, and let's not forget the cryptic note that was found folded up and taped to the back of his computer after his death that talked about the Freemasons and other odd things. And I think most disturbing of all is the fact that before he went missing, he answered an unknown phone call to which he yelled, quote, "Oh shit," before running out of his house in a panic, ultimately to his death. This is the mysterious death of Ray Rivera, and I think more people should know what happened to him, so let's talk about it. Ray Rivera was 32 years old when he suddenly died on May 16th, 2006. At the time of his death, Ray was married to his longtime partner, Allison, and they lived in a quiet little neighborhood in Baltimore. The two had moved to Baltimore from California so that Ray could be closer to his childhood best friend, Porter. Porter was a publisher who owned his own investment company, which was called Stansberry & Associates Investment and Research. Porter offered Ray a job there as a writer and a videographer, and seeing as though Ray was an aspiring screenwriter, he gladly took the job. He thought it was a win-win getting to pursue his dreams with his wife, all while being closer to his best friend. About 6 months before his death, though, Ray suddenly resigned from his position at Porter's company. He then began writing as an independent contractor, but it was during this time that Ray's behavior began to change. According to his wife, Ray started becoming more and more paranoid, which seemed really random, and he wouldn't explain why. Then, one day out of the blue, the couple was at a local park when Ray encountered an unknown man. Allison had no idea who this man was or what they talked about, but she said that this encounter left Ray visibly distraught. This brings us to May 15th, 2006. Ray and Allison were woken up in the middle of the night to their house alarm going off, but when Ray went to investigate, he didn't find anyone. Although he did say that it looked like their window screens had been tampered with. Ray did seem scared, but they went back to bed without any more issues. The next morning, Allison had to go out of town for a business meeting, but Ray wasn't alone in the house, because staying with them was their friend Claudia. All seemed normal that day until about 4 p.m. when Claudia heard Ray answer the phone in his office. She didn't hear much of the conversation or know who called, but she heard Ray suddenly yell, quote, "Oh shit," end quote, before running frantically out of the back door of his house. He drove away but briefly came back, only to frantically run out of the house once again. He was in such a hurry that he left in his flip-flops, and he had left the lights and his computer on in his office. The entire rest of that day, Allison tried calling Ray, but she never got an answer. When she called Claudia later that night, Claudia told her that she overheard Ray's weird phone call, but they tried not to worry and thought maybe Ray was just out drinking or something. But when he still didn't return home by the next day, Allison knew something was horribly wrong. She came home early from her work trip and tried looking for him and calling him some more. But after not being able to get a hold of him, she reported him missing to the Baltimore Police Department. In the following days, a massive search for Ray was conducted, but it was like he vanished into thin air. Authorities were able to determine that his last known phone call, the one where he said, "Oh shit," came from Porter's investment company. But finding out who exactly made that call was tricky because the call had come from a switchboard, so it wasn't like a single line that could easily be traced back to a single person. Because of this, it was never determined who actually called Ray the night he went missing, or what they talked about that caused him to run out of his house. And no one ever came forward about this either, which made the investigation way more difficult. About a week after his disappearance, Ray's family found his car. It was parked in a parking lot off of St. Paul Street in the Mount Vernon neighborhood, and this was pretty close to Porter's investment company, aka where Ray used to work. It had a parking ticket on it from May 16th, the day he went missing. So clearly he had been in the area, but the question now was, where is Ray? Police searched the area but found no sign of him, but but a day later, a mysterious discovery would be made that would turn this investigation upside down. A couple of Ray's old coworkers went to the top of a parking structure near where his car was found and noticed an odd hole in the roof of the Belvedere Hotel, which is a really historic, highly secure hotel in Baltimore. To be more exact, they were standing on the top of a parking structure right next door to the Belvedere Hotel, and they noticed the hole was in the south wing of the roof. And looking closer, it looked like someone's belongings were sitting on the roof near the hole. So this is when they notified police. When Baltimore PD went into the Belvedere Hotel beneath where the hole was, they made a gruesome discovery. There they found Ray's badly decomposed body, which just so happened to be in the conference room of the hotel. It was clear that he'd been dead pretty much the entire time he was missing, but this is where things start to get strange. So initially, police thought that Ray willingly jumped off the roof of the hotel 14 stories up and then crashed into a lower roof of this hotel and then landed in the conference room. But then the lead investigator on the case said that it looked like the scene had almost been staged. His glasses and his phone were found on the roof near the hole, but they were in great condition, all intact, and nothing was broken, which was odd because if he had jumped or fallen off the roof 14 stories up and then crashed into the building, you'd think that they would have had some damage to them. Then they examined Ray's injuries, which really only bring more questions to the case. So both of his shins had been broken inward and in an inconsistent way, and not only that, but the right side of his pelvis was crushed. He also had some fractured ribs, punctured lungs, and some damage to his skull. The medical examiner noted that if he had really jumped and had fallen feet first into the hotel, he wouldn't have had these types of injuries. According to them, his injuries were not completely consistent with just falling or jumping off of the roof, and it wasn't just the way he was injured that made investigators have doubt. The main question was how exactly he got to that part of the hotel where he supposedly fell in. Police theorized that he jumped from the top roof of the hotel and fell 14 stories to a lower roof of the hotel, but the hole was roughly 45 feet from the roof's edge, and the layout of the roof and the location of the hole just really don't add up as there's a pretty sizable distance between the two. If Ray had fallen vertically like police initially thought, it would have been a fall of 177 feet, and it would have taken him roughly 3.3 seconds till impact. If he jumped from the main roof and somehow flew the distance of 43 feet to the lower roof before impact, he would have had to have been going a speed of 10 miles per hour. Investigators say this is somewhere between a fast run and a sprint for an average healthy man wearing running shoes. But here's the thing. At the time of his death, Ray was wearing flip-flops, which would have made it incredibly difficult to go that fast. And another thing that's highly suspicious is the fact that his flip-flops had drag marks on them. And it seemed incredibly unlikely that he would have been able to jump the entire 43 feet to the other side of the roof, especially with flip-flops on. The biggest mystery about this is how exactly Ray fell where he did and how he got there. So then police started looking into the possibility that he climbed up onto this really thin ledge of the hotel and jumped. But this was quickly ruled out because in order to get to that exact spot, he would have had to enter someone's office or another person's hotel room. So then police started investigating the possibility that Ray was murdered. But the only thing they found backing this up was one missing personal item. Ray had this really nice engraved money clip that he always carried with him, but when he was found, it was missing, and to this day, it's just mysteriously never been found. Authorities hope that there would be security footage from in and around the hotel since this is a pretty secure hotel, but conveniently, all of the cameras on the roof and leading up to the roof weren't working due to technical problems. So then the next hope was that someone, either a guest of the hotel or an employee, saw Ray that day in the hotel, but no one did. I guess there weren't any alarms on their fire doors, and it was possible that the elevator was left unlocked for Ray to just walk in off the street. It was also rumored that the bartenders on the 13th floor of the hotel would sometimes go up to the roof to smoke, so it was possible that the door to the roof had been left unlocked or propped open. But for not one single person to have seen or heard Ray that day, it just seems so unusual, and not one person physically saw him on the roof either. Another weird thing to me is the fact that Ray had been dead inside of the conference room of the hotel for over a week, yet not one single employee reportedly saw or smelled him. So even though every aspect of this case was bizarre and really unexplained, authorities really didn't have much to go off of. The medical examiner ruled his death as undetermined because it wasn't clear what had actually killed Ray since he didn't have a loss of blood and none of his injuries were extremely life-threatening. Authorities closed the case, citing his death as undetermined but a probable suicide. Allison and the rest of his family just don't agree though. Ray seemed happy, they were trying for a baby, and he'd even rented out an office space the weekend he disappeared to write, which doesn't really suggest that he would take his own life. So this made Allison search their house for any clues that could explain if he really did this to himself, or even a possible suicide note. And what she found is chilling, but this also only raises more questions. Allison found a folded up piece of paper in plastic taped to the back of Ray's computer. It was a note that he had written the day he died, and it appeared really random. random. It was addressed to, quote, brothers and sisters, end quote, and referred throughout to a well-played game. In the note, he requested to be 5 years younger, and he listed names of prominent figures in Hollywood, movies, and Freemason quotes. The note began and ended in phrases used in the Masonic order. Allison did hand this over to the FBI, and after they analyzed the note, they concluded that it was not a suicide note, but rather just a strange note that Ray wrote. Why he tried to hide it like that is still a mystery. Allison said Ray liked anything involving secret societies and did have a seemingly new interest in the Freemasons, but since he was a writer, this could have just been a random list of things that he wanted to research about. One thing that is weird, though, is that a representative at a local Freemasons lodge did confirm that Ray inquired about a membership the same day he went missing, but ultimately this was ruled out as having any connection to his death. Although we don't know exactly what happened to Ray, there are a few theories. One theory is that Ray really did just end his own life, that he really did just jump off the roof that night. Ray and Allison had reportedly gone to the Belvedere Hotel's roof twice in the past to watch the sunset, and when Ray ran out of his house in a panic that night, he left a website up on his computer that showed where the sun was going to be setting that night in Baltimore, which was in the general area of the hotel. His family does not believe that he would willingly jump off of a roof, though, because he was terrified of heights. Another theory is that he suffered some sort of mental break and ended his own life following a manic episode. Authorities believe this is likely what happened, especially after examining the letter he wrote. Ray didn't have any history of mental illness, but the letter was a clear indicator that he could have been going through an unexpected manic episode. This would also explain his growing paranoia and his new interest in the Freemasons. Theory number 3 is that he was murdered and that foul play was involved, even though police found no evidence of this. It is odd that his injuries don't exactly match with falling off of a roof. That, along with the drag marks in his shoes, leads some people to believe that he could have been hit by a car. Adding to this theory is the fact that the lead investigator on the case believed that this was a homicide, citing that the hole he supposedly fell in was too clean of a hole and rather too small to fit his body. But suspiciously, this investigator was taken off the case, so he didn't really get a say in the final ruling. Some think that his body was just stored in the hotel's conference room for some reason, and that he was placed under the hole to make it look like he fell. Another really wild theory that for some reason was going around was that Ray's body was thrown from a helicopter. I'm not sure why this rumor started, but I guess it was because the area of this hotel is a really popular area, yet no one saw Ray in or outside of the hotel at all. But nobody saw a helicopter in the area either, and this wouldn't make sense because a helicopter wouldn't have hovered low enough to toss him directly onto the roof. Theory number 4 is that Ray's best friend Porter, or at the very least his company, was involved. Like I said, the last call that Ray ever got that night was from someone at that company, and I'm not entirely sure if it's a coincidence that the hotel / where he died was near Porter's company. It was reported early on that after Ray went missing, Porter's behavior changed and he refused to talk to the police or help his family in the search. There was also a rumor that Porter issued a gag order on his employees immediately after Ray's body was found, and then he lawyered up. How true that is, though, I'm not sure, because according to Porter, he did help in the search for Ray, and he did cooperate with police. To me, there is a lot here that does point to foul play, but there's also a lot that suggests he could have taken his own life. He could have had a psychotic break that no one knew he was going through, or there really could have been someone out to get him. But it's now been 19 years, and whatever happened to Ray that night at the hotel remains a mystery.
I've covered so many cases, this one threw me for a loop. The year is 1974 in New Orleans when a 16-year-old girl is getting ready to give birth to a beautiful baby girl. Her name is Kathy Turkanian, and she's having a really difficult time deciding what to do. Because she was so young, she was feeling the pressure heavily from her family members that were telling her that she was way too young to become a mom and suggesting that she give up her baby for adoption. She gives birth, she names her daughter Alexis Miranda Badger, and she tries to do the best that she can to raise this baby to give her the life that she wanted her to have. But it was too much. She had no support, she had no help. Her mom was diagnosed with cancer. She wasn't doing well, which meant that Kathy's siblings also needed someone there to help raise them. She also had to work in order to just survive. Trying to balance all of that plus more very quickly became unrealistic. On top of that, she still had her mom in her ear constantly telling her that adoption was her only option. So Kathy then makes the extremely difficult decision that she's pretty much forced into to give her daughter up for adoption, hoping and praying that she would go to a good family. A family who would love her, who would support her, care for her, and be able to give her everything that the world had to offer, things that Kathy herself wasn't able to give her at that time in her life as a teen mom. Alexis, the baby girl, was adopted and her name was changed to Andrea Bowman. The couple adopting her was a couple from Michigan, Dennis and Brenda Bowman, and it was a closed adoption, meaning that Kathy didn't know the identity of the couple who adopted her baby, didn't know where they were from. She would lose all of her rights to either see or talk to or know anything about her baby, and she would not be given the possibility to have any sort of visits or communication with the adoptive parents nor with her baby. So she did all that she could do. She said bye to her baby girl and for the following years just convinced herself that she was someone somewhere in the world living a happy life with a loving family. Kathy went on to live her life. She grew up, she went to school, she got married, years passed, but throughout it all, her baby, who she still thought of as Alexis, was always in the back of her head. Naturally, she was constantly thinking and wondering how she was doing, if she was happy, and she felt an urge to reach out to her, especially after she knew that Alexis had turned 18 years old, then a legal adult. She was so curious about her life and wondered if maybe Alexis, wherever she was in the world, was wondering about her too. The urge to find her only got stronger when Kathy realized that women in her family had a long history of breast cancer. She wanted to be able to tell Alexis because she felt like that would be beneficial for her to know, but she couldn't find her anywhere. We know that she had no contact information for her or for the adoptive parents, but she also couldn't call the adoption agency and ask where her daughter was. She couldn't search her up by name because her name had been changed, so every door that she tried to open was legally shut. As years kept coming and going, something inside of Kathy just could not let it go. She had said, quote, "I could hear her calling me, find me, find me." Kathy thought that what she was feeling was just the guilt of a mother who gave her daughter away, but that's not what it was. In April of 2010, so 36 years after the adoption, Kathy received a letter informing her that her child had gone missing when she was 14 years old in 1989. She had been missing for over 20 years, and the reason why the social worker was reaching out to her wasn't to inform her. They needed something from her because an unidentified body had been found next to a cornfield, and the police needed Kathy's DNA for testing to see if it was her daughter. But before we continue with Kathy, we need to talk about what Alexis/Andrea's life actually looked like growing up inside of the Bowman's house with her adoptive parents. And I am going to be referring to her as Andrea from now on. Andrea grew up in Michigan in a home with Dennis and Brenda Bowman. From the outside, it looked normal enough, but inside, something was very wrong. In 1988, Andrea had raised concerns with staff at her school, expressing fearfulness about going home. For some reason, one day she was so afraid to go home that it got to the point that they ended up calling the police. Andrea was interviewed, and during that interview, she told them that her adoptive father had been S-ing her throughout the night and that her adoptive mother knew but did not care. She was barely a teenager, she was a baby, but she felt like she had no other option than to put on a brave face and finally tell what she thought was a trusted adult the truth. And I imagine it was such a scary thing for her to do, but whatever happened, all she knew was that she did not want to go back to that house. But instead of taking a more careful approach, a social worker just decided to head over to the Bowman's house to confront them and ask her parents about what she had said. And of course, Brenda and Dennis denied everything, and they painted this picture that Andrea was having behavioral issues and that she had been acting out because they had recently told her that she was adopted, and they claimed that that made her really upset. And just like that, no further questions. Andrea was sent back into that house, back to living with a man that she was very clearly afraid of. On top of that, allegations of the mistreatment were not just coming from Andrea herself, they were also coming from her friends who had been invited over to the house and had witnessed it firsthand. One of Andrea's friends knew about the essay because Andrea had confided in her and told her about it. Another friend recalled going over to the Bowman's house and seeing Dennis Bowman chasing around and putting his hands on Andrea. Another friend stated that while she was over at their house, she remembers thinking that it was weird that everyone else was eating dinner, everyone had burgers, but Andrea wasn't allowed to have a burger. She was only allowed to eat a quote-unquote leftover sandwich consisting of only bread and condiments. When they were all seated at the dinner table, her friend has said, quote, "Andrea made a comment that that's all she was allowed to eat, so Dennis came across the table right in front of me and hit her so hard he almost knocked her out of the chair. She started bawling her eyes out, of course. Brenda sat there and did nothing about it." The friends that knew about how Andrea was being treated all encouraged her to leave, but at the same time, of course, they were all like 13, 14 years old, so they couldn't really do much to help. But also there was the fact that Andrea didn't really want to leave. Well, of course she wanted to leave, but she wouldn't because Brenda, the adoptive mother, had just given birth to Andrea's little sister, Vanessa, like a year prior. Andrea loved that baby like she was her own. She took care of her. She changed her diaper. She would feed her. She'd watch over her, protect her. She could not bear the thought that if she did leave, there was no telling what would happen with Vanessa or if they would be even kept together or not. So her friends would encourage her to leave, and Andrea would just say, no way. I need to stay. I need to take care of Vanessa. 13 to 14 years old, by the way, she was a baby herself. The only plan that Andrea could really imagine working out was waiting until Vanessa was older and then going to find her real mom, Kathy. But she never got that chance because on March 11th of 1989, Andrea Bowman disappeared. Dennis Bowman was the person who called the police to report her as missing. All he said was that she had ran away. He told them that they had been having issues with her behavior and that one day he left the house, he came back, Andrea was gone, and so was a stack of money. So basically he said, "I have a troubled child, she stole money from me, packed a bag and left. Okay, cool, thanks, bye." And authorities, for whatever reason, just took his word for it. The case was classified as a runaway and Andrea was basically simply forgotten. So fast forward 2 decades, Andrea has been missing this entire time. Kathy gets a letter in the mail asking for a DNA test to see if the human remains found belonged to her daughter. Without any hesitation, Kathy gave up her DNA. It was tested, but it wasn't a match. So that did not solve Andrea's disappearance, but what it did do was install this strong determination inside of Kathy to figure it out. Whatever happened to her daughter, she needed to know. She She needed to know what her life was like, how and why she disappeared, and where she was now. Even though Kathy hadn't been in her daughter's life, she was now, and she was not going to rest until she got some answers. Through doing a lot of digging on social media, Kathy was able to find out that her daughter's name had been changed to Andrea Bowman, that her adoptive parents were a couple named Dennis and Brenda Bowman, and that they lived in Hamilton, Michigan. Kathy decided to set up a Facebook page and named it Find Andrea M. Bowman. She also started going to missing persons conferences. She kept digging on social media, trying to gather just as much information as she could. And then Andrea's old school friends started reaching out, and the stories that they were telling Kathy were horrifying. It was from them that Kathy was made aware about the SA claims and the mistreatment that Andrea had experienced in her own home at the hands of Dennis Bowman. Kathy then finds a way to get in contact with a retired Michigan detective who was familiar with Andrea's case, and according to her, he tells her something along the lines of, something is weird here, something's fishy, something's weird, this case has not been handled properly. So she decides to use the Freedom of Information Act, aka FOIA. Kathy submitted a formal FOIA request to obtain Dennis Bowman's public criminal records. She gets them, and what she finds out about this man only makes her about 1,000,000 times more suspicious. It turns out that he had a very serious charge from back in 1980, so this was years before Andrea disappeared. So one summer night, a 19-year-old girl experienced the most traumatizing thing that has ever happened to her. She had been riding her bike home when a motorcycle rode her off the road. This man then attempted to lead her into the woods into a secluded area, and when she refused to walk into the woods, he pulled out a weapon. Luckily, when he used it, he missed her, so she started trying to get back to her bike as fast as possible so that she could ride away from this man that was very clearly trying to harm her. A passing vehicle distracted the man for just enough seconds for the girl to get back on her bike and ride away as fast as she could, until she found another car who then eventually helped her get home safely. She was able to give a description of the man, and in a lineup, she very quickly pointed out the man responsible. And what do you know? It was Dennis Bowman. He pled guilty, but for whatever reason, he was only sentenced to 5 years. So he served his sentence. Meanwhile, his wife was at home with Andrea and her little sister Vanessa. Then Dennis was just released and returned back home. Then in 1988, he got arrested and charged again because he was breaking and entering into a former female coworker's house over and over again. This coworker obviously knew who Dennis was, and she was practically losing her mind because every so often she would hear noise inside the house, making her think that someone had broken in. Sometimes there would be solid evidence that someone had broken in. For example, her blinds would be either ripped off or cut off. And very often as well, many things inside of her home would be either taken, missing, or moved. She had her suspicions about Dennis Bowman because she always had a very weird, bad gut feeling about him. And eventually, when his house was searched, they found a bag of her belongings hidden away somewhere in his house. So it was him that had been breaking and entering and stealing things from her and scaring her. He had been doing it for months plural. He offered up a pathetic lie, claiming that him and said coworker were very close and that she had been allowing him to stay with her. But the coworker was literally like, dude, what? I only know you from work. I want absolutely nothing to do with you in my personal life. You actually scare me because you're weird and gross. I think he broke into her house like over 20 times, maybe even more than 30. And at one point, one of his other excuses was that he needed to break in because he needed to use the bathroom. Ultimately, for that, he was sentenced for 1 year and then released. So, years were passing by, and because the body found was not Andrea, she was still a missing person. Kathy was still doing everything in her power to get answers and to start connecting the dots. All signs so far in her mind are pointing directly towards Dennis Bowman. One day, she decides to use Google Earth to pull up the Bowman's house and to see if she could drop her little pin down there to look around the property. She is zooming in closer and closer, and she sees an area in the backyard that looks just weird. It looks disturbed. It's a concrete block. And something inside of her told her that there she was. Kathy became convinced that Dennis Bowman had gotten rid of her daughter Andrea and buried her in his backyard. Kathy was not giving up. She started calling the Bowmans directly multiple times a day. She had a billboard up on the main road to their house offering an $11,000 reward for an arrest in the case. She camped outside of their property. She confronted Brenda Bowman directly. She was giving it her all. And then in November 2019, there was a complete breakthrough in the case, but not one that many people expected. 2 detectives, one from the Michigan State Police and one from the police department in Virginia, happened to both attend the same cold case homicide conference. And they very quickly realized that they were both looking at Dennis Bowman as a suspect in 2 different separate cases. He was a suspect for a different homicide case in Virginia, and he ended up being arrested for that. Once he was behind bars and facing those charges in Virginia, investigators began trying to build some sort of rapport with him. Slowly, carefully, they wanted him to start talking, and start talking he did, eventually. It wasn't until early 2020 when Dennis Bowman finally gave a confession. Andrea was gone. She had been gone for years, and he was the person responsible. According to Dennis Bowman, this is what happened the night of March 11th, 1989. He said that he came home and found Andrea walking out of a bedroom. When he asked what she was doing, she told him that she was leaving, and if he tried to stop her, she would tell everyone that he had been essaying her. That made him really angry. He swung at her, causing her to lose balance and fall. He told his wife, quote, her head rolled over and she just stared like doll eyes, end quote. She wasn't responsive, but instead of calling for help, Dennis decided to get rid of her completely. He separated Andrea's 14-year-old body into pieces, placed her remains in a barrel, and then called the police to report her missing. When the Bowmans moved to a new house in 1990, Dennis dug up the barrel and reburied it in the backyard of their new property. Quote, I dug the hole and I put the barrel in. She's been right there the whole time, end quote. Andrea had been buried in the backyard, right where Kathy had always said that she was. In February of 2020, investigators recovered Andrea's skeletal remains from a shallow grave buried beneath a concrete slab in the backyard of the Bowman home. When the remains were tested against Kathy's DNA, it was confirmed that they were those of 14-year-old Andrea. Kathy said it was as if her daughter had been, quote, screaming in that backyard for years, end quote. On December 22nd of 2021, Dennis Bowman pleaded no contest to second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 35 to 50 years in prison. This was now on top of the 2 life sentences that he was already facing for that other case in Virginia. It was the murder of a different young girl named Kathleen Doyle. At his sentencing, the judge stated, quote, his numerous behavior in this case, other convictions all indicate Mr. Bowman is a serious, dangerous man that has harmed many communities, many families. It's impossible to even articulate the words to describe what he has done. Reading what he has done is sickening. And pretty much throughout it all, Brenda Bowman stood right by her husband's side. I mean, she did say that he did confess to her about Andrea being buried in their backyard, and she claimed that she didn't know. I'm gonna let you be the judge of that. But she's never been charged for anything, and in other horrible, horrible cases, she has stood right by her husband's side, even after he's been convicted. As for Kathy, the latest that I could find is that she's still fighting because guess what? Andrea's ashes were handed to Dennis's wife, Andrea's adoptive mother, Brenda Bowman. They were given to her. I read an update from 2025 in which Kathy said that she was preparing a civil court fight to get more information about the location of her daughter's ashes. She also talked about campaigning to ban close adoption in memory of her daughter, saying that she was forced into a close adoption in which records of the biological parents were kept sealed, which she believes prioritizes the adoptive parents over the child. Quote, I don't know if I could do it in my lifetime, but it's time to get a movement started, end quote. Insane, and my heart breaks that Kathy thought that she was doing the right thing when she gave up her daughter for adoption because she thought that she was giving her to a loving family, hopefully to have a good life. And then this makes me sick. That is all I have for today's case. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Andrea's story. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.